Hi, this is Jessic, and in this PHP security tutorial I'm going to explain a sort of common problem with cookies. The problem is that people seem to, often seem to think that cookies and the session are sort of alternatives to each other, without really considering one of the key differences. That difference is that cookies, the data stored in cookies, is actually sent to the user's browser, which stores the data and then sends it back on request for pages and stuff. Whereas the session actually stores the data on the server, meaning it can't be accessed by the user unless you allow them to via your page, and more importantly, it can't be modified by the user, which cookies can be modified. To demonstrate the problem, I've got this very simple and bad login system set up here. So the way this works is, when the user enters the correct email and password, a cookie is set, and then the fact that that cookie exists is used to indicate that they are logged in. So I'll just show you that I've got my cookies window open here, and there are no cookies for this URL or this server. If I just log in, I've got the user set up as example@website.com and the password of pickle. If I just log in, I have to reload the page just because of the way cookies work. They're only sent after they've been set, if that makes sense. Anyway, you can see now that I am logged in, and the way this is done is because it's set a cookie, which you can see in this list, logged in equals to 1. And the problem is that once somebody knows that this is how your login system works, they can just come to your site and manually set this cookie. So say you had a sort of more complicated system where you also stored the username in a cookie, and you used that to identify what they're allowed to access. Like say if the username was admin, you let them into the admin area. If say a user was also able to register for an account, they registered, saw that you did the login system like this, and like the username was stored in the cookie as well, they could then just change their username to admin, and they will be able to access the admin area without knowing the password. So cookies generally should not be trusted, is the point here, and in fact they should be treated in the same way as any other variable, like a get variable for example. You wouldn't just set a get variable logged in equals 1, because that's so obvious and easy to change. It's not particularly obvious to change a cookie, although it is just as easy. So the way to fix this is to not store sort of sensitive information in the cookie, and to crap. And to always think about what can potentially happen when a user is able to change a value. So to demonstrate, to sort of show you a way that this can be fixed, we're going to go back to our login page. This is the code here, by the way. Down here we just have a very simple form for email and password, and then at the top we have a check for that form being submitted. The email address is escaped to prevent SQL injection, and the password is converted to an SHA-1 hash. And then this information is then used to query the database. If the given username and email, the email and password combination exists, one row is returned, and then we set the cookie. So the solution to the problem is to actually store the username and password in the cookie, and then we can check that against the database. So to do that, we store the username and password here, where we've previously stored the logged in equals 1. So what we'll do is just change logged in to email, and we'll store the email address here, and this will be the actual email address that they provide, not the escaped one. So post email, and then we need to set another cookie for the password. Cookie, password. I'll just call it pass, that's what I called the variable, and this will be equal to the SHA-1 hash, which is in the pass variable. The reason we don't just store the plain text password is because someone else that has access to the same computer would be able to view the cookies of the other user and see their password, which is obviously something you don't want to happen. So just to add a bit of to make it a little bit more secure, we store the hashed password. And now what we're going to do instead is, let's just demonstrate how this works first. If we go back to my login page and just log in again using the same credentials and hit login and view the cookies, You can see now we have this email, which just contains the email address, and we have this password, which contains an SHA-1 hash of the password I entered. So what we can do now is, well, we don't need this cookie here, so that can be removed. So what we can do now is, on the page load, we can check to see if this email and password combination is set in the cookie, and if it is, we'll set a session variable. Well, if it is and it's valid, we'll set a session variable, and then we'll just use the fact that the session variable exists to indicate that the user is logged in. And because the session is stored on the server, there's no way that they'll be able to edit that sort of directly. So, going back to the code, the way to do this is here at the top where we have if is set post email or password for if the form has been submitted, we add an OR, and we also check if is set cookie, cookie spelled right, email and cookie pass. So if the cookies are both set, what we'll do is add a check here to define these two variables in a slightly different way. So what we'll do is here we'll add basically the same check again. So if is set cookie email and cookie password. So we just copy and paste that. We'll have if here like so, and then we'll have something. Otherwise we'll have the one from the form like so. And here we need to define these variables slightly differently because they are coming from the user, they can't be trusted. And if you remember, the email was stored as effectively the same as this, so we'll just have email as the same. So email equals MySQL real escape string cookie email, and then we'll have the password. Now if you remember, this was already hashed, so we don't need to call SHA-1 again, but we do need to call MySQL real escape string, because this value is effectively coming from the user, so you could edit this to perform SQL injection as well. Just something to be aware of. Like so. And then at this point, these two variables, well, these variables will have the same values, meaning that this check here to see if the user is valid is still sort of fine. So then after we have verified that the user does exist, we can set the cookies again, which will extend their sort of lifetime, if you like, although that's not necessarily needed. So we could add another check here, or if you wanted to specify the expiry time, because I've got the default of 0 here, you could specify like a number of seconds here. I think it's seconds, yeah. So you could set, for example, 600, so 600 seconds, and that will mean that the user will be automatically logged out after a period of inactivity of 600 seconds. But also, now because we're using the session, we need to set a session variable here. So we're going to set the session variable logged in equal to 1. And like I said, because they can't edit this, this is sort of a fine method to use. And because we're using the session, we need to add a session start call at the top of the file. So now what we have is a check for the form, or a check for the cookies. If it is using the cookies, it uses the cookies here, and if it's using the form, it uses the form values. And it checks the username, and if that username and password combination is valid, it extends the lifetime of those cookies, and also sets a session variable. Now, essentially, all of this only needs to happen if the session variable is not set, but just for the sake of this, I'm not going to do that. So coming down here, we can just use a isSet session check to indicate that the user is logged in, and this will now be much more secure. So going back to our page, we can just test to see how this works. I'll just remove these two cookies as well, so you can see sort of how it works. So reloading the page, we don't get any messages. If I log in with the same credentials, like so, you can see that "you are logged in" has appeared. Because we're setting the session on the same page, it now appears immediately. And if we go to our cookies page, we have a session ID, but not the cookies, which is curious. Why is that? Okay, so the reason that didn't work is because, well, it did work, except that the cookies were expiring. This third parameter is the time that the cookies should expire, not the number of seconds that they should live for. So this should be an actual timestamp. So this should be time plus 600, not just 600. Like so. And now, if we log in again by just entering the same credentials, hitting login, go to the cookies page, you can now see that those have appeared. So these should live for 600 seconds, which is, what's that, 10 minutes? Yeah, 10 minutes. So it's now 16:10, and in 10 minutes these will expire and I won't be logged in, providing the session has also been removed. So the sort of point here is not to store any information that controls security aspects of the site directly in cookies. Instead, use the session for that. It is also fine to store like email and passwords in the cookie, but ideally you would just well, you should definitely encrypt the password, and I mean you could also encrypt the email address, but that's considered less sensitive really. So anyway, the point of the tutorial, or the point of this video, is to make sure that you do not trust the values of cookies. So thank you for watching, and hopefully this was useful.